Hi, this is Amanda. Today we're going to draw this cute little fox in a children's book illustration style together. I will guide you through my whole drawing process from base colors to texture and final touches. The sketch, color palette, and brush info are all listed below, so feel free to draw along with me. Alright, let's get started. We are working on a A4 sized canvas with an RGB color profile and 300 dpi. The first step is super simple. We're going to block in the base colors on separate layers. As you see, I'm using the favorite chalk brush from my flat color brushes set. I've placed the sketch layer at the very top and lowered its opacity to around 10%. So it's fade enough to guide us without getting in the way. Now you see I'm starting to block in the colors underneath the sketch. On this new layer, I'm beginning with the leg on the left side. On the same layer, I'm also drawing the fox tail and neck. These parts sit behind the rest of the body, so I'm drawing them together on this layer. Other elements like the head and clothing will be added later on separate layers above. Now here I've created a new layer. This is layer 6, and I'm going to work on the fox head. For the color, I'm still using the second swatch from the first row of the color palette I provided. As you watch me fill in the shape, you will notice that I start by shrinking my brush size just a bit when I'm working near the edges. That helps preserve that soft chalky texture of the brush and give the edges a nice clean look. Once the edges are done, I then enlarge the brush to quickly fill in the middle area. It's a simple trick that keeps the shapes clean without slowing down the coloring process too much. You see that I am working on the white fur around the fox mouth. I also created a new layer just for this section to keep things organized. At this point, we have the main body, the head, and the white fur on the face area, all placed on 3 separate layers. Now I'm going back to layer 5 to add the left ear. Since this ear sits further back in the composition, just like the body and tail, it makes sense to place it on the same layer as those parts. That way, everything that is visually further behind stays grouped together. You can see now I have been drawing the nose and eyes. I like to keep each of these on separate layers so it's easier to adjust them later if needed. And here's a small tip. Some of you have told me that drawing perfectly round eyes can be very tricky. So I've made this new brush called Dot and Dots, which you will find in my liner brushes set. This brush creates a perfect circle with just a single tap. I use it to draw the whites of the eyes with a white dot, and then added the pupils by tapping once with dark brown color. If you feel like the size or placement isn't quite right, you can always use tools in Procreate to adjust them. Super quick and easy. Now we are moving to elements that sit in front of the body, like the bright yellow shirt the fox is wearing and the red basket she's holding in her arms. Inside of the basket, I also added a few pine cones, something a little squirrel friend might like. Each of these parts, the shirt, the basket, and even the hand holding the basket, is drawn on separate layers. Let me pause here for a second so you can take a closer look at how I've organized my layers. Next, we are going to draw the front leg on the right side. I think it really needs to be on a new layer because it sits above the left leg but below the yellow t-shirt. So I created a new layer right between layer 5 and layer 11, between the shirt and the back leg, and added the front leg there. Next, for details like the white fur inside of the ear and the darker color along the edge, I used a method called clipping mask. These color areas sit right on top of the ear shape. So to keep them neatly inside of the existing ear shape, I created a new layer above the yellow ear base and set it as a clipping mask. That way, anything I draw on that new layer will only show up within the boundaries of the ear shape underneath. It's a handy little trick. Whenever you're adding new colors or shading that should stay within a shape you've already painted, using a clipping mask makes it much easier. So as you can see, I also used the clipping mask method to add the white color on the bright yellow t-shirt, as well as the white part on the back of the tail. If you're enjoying this video, I also made a real-time version of this tutorial. It's the full drawing process with no speed up, and I talk you through everything as I draw. Once you grab it from my shop, you will get your own dashboard where you can find all the tutorials and brushes you've purchased, so you can come back and draw along anytime you like. You will find the link in the description, and if you're one of the first 50 students, don't forget to use the early bird coupon for 10% off at checkout. I hope to see you there. Alright, let's get back to drawing. At this point, most of the base colors are in place, but before we move on to the next step, I like to turn off the sketch layer and take a moment to clean up the edges. You will see me go over each color block layer to check if the shapes look nice and if the edges are clean. If you notice any rough areas, you simply switch your brush to a smaller size and tidy things up a bit. And that's it for the first step. This part can feel a little tedious since we are just blocking in all the base colors. You know, one color per layer and using a solid brush to fill them in. The most important thing here is to organize your layers based on which parts of the drawing are in the front and which are behind. Also, as we mentioned earlier, always take a moment to clean up the edges so the shapes feel more polished. Oh, and I'm switching my iPad screen protector since Paperlike kindly sent me theirs to try out. So I thought I'd give it a go and share my first impressions while I switch it out. Now let's move on to step 2 and continue drawing with this new screen protector. Step 2 is about adding color variations to each of the base color blocks based on light and shadow. For me, my habit is to start with the larger color blocks in a drawing. So for this one, I started with the yellow t-shirt. At this step, we will switch to a different brush. I'm using the grass texture brush from my texture brushes set. When I'm painting the shirt, I set the light source to come from above. So I add a darker yellow at the lower parts of the t-shirt to create shadow. You'll notice that I often sample the transition between the two colors. This helps create a smooth color blend. You can see that I started by painting the shirt and then moved on to larger areas of the body, including the legs. For this step, I'm picking colors from the color palette that are either lighter or darker than the base colors and use the light source I've set to add volume to each color block. Now regarding the layers, you can see that my approach here is a bit different from what I showed in my previous tutorial. In that tutorial, I taught you to use alpha lock on all the base color layers. This ensures that when you add shading, or you can also say texture, you won't accidentally paint outside of the base colors. However, you can achieve the same effect by creating a new layer and setting it to clipping mask. The painting process is the same, as the color changes based on light and shadow will only affect the base color shapes you've already painted in step 1. So whether you're using alpha lock or clipping mask, the result will be the same. In this tutorial, I'm using clipping mask, and as you can see, the original orange base color of the head looked pretty flat at first, but once I added lighter and darker tones on the clipping mask layer, it immediately started to look more three-dimensional. So in this step, we're basically adding color variation to each base color. You can either use Alpha Lock or clipping mask, whichever you prefer. The idea is to paint both lighter and darker tones onto each color block to show how light is hitting the object. Areas closer to the light source will be brighter and slightly warmer, while parts farther away will appear darker. I also like to add a bit of a bluish tint to the shadow areas to make the contrast feel more natural. That is the main goal of this step, adding texture and depth through light and shadow. You see, when I'm working on smaller areas like these little pie cones that the fox is holding, I don't bother creating new clipping mask layer. Instead, I just use Alpha Lock directly on the base color layer. So personally, for larger shapes, I do prefer using clipping mask so I can adjust things more easily. But for these tiny color shapes, Alpha Lock works just fine, and it keeps the process a bit quicker too. Alright, now we are moving on to the third and final step. For this part, we will create a new layer on top of everything we've done so far. This is where we will add finishing touches. The brushes I usually use in this final step are all from my liner brushes set. The two I reach for the most are dry ink and multi-use pencil. In this final stage, we are just adding smaller details to bring the whole illustration together. These include things like delicate line work, some darker accents, and the brightest highlights. For example, I will brighten up the eyes with a small highlight and even add a bit of a shadow for an eyeliner effect. So I've added some brighter highlights to the eyes and deepened the shadows around the eyelids to have a bit of those eyeliner effect. Then I started going over things like the edge of the basket, adding lines to suggest the woven texture, and darkening the outlines of smaller details like the pine cones. I also deepened some edges around the body, especially the hands, to help separate the fingers. After adding these darker lines and a few extra highlights, you really can see how it brings the whole piece together. It helps push the drawing that final step towards feeling polished and complete. Alright, I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Don't forget to download the free line art and color palette to make it easier for you to follow along. If you create your own version of this cute little fox, I'd love to see it. Just tag me and use the hashtag AmandaNinji illustration when you post it on Instagram so I can check it out and share it. And if you purchase the full version of this tutorial, remember, if you have any questions or want some feedback, feel free to leave me a comment in the course discussion section. I'm always happy to help. Thank you for hanging out today. I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.